Hello there. Today I thought I would speak a little bit about something that's not directly related to the content within OpenSim, but spend some more time explaining, the business side of things. I was trying to find a better word because I know that a lot of people, at least designers or content developers for OpenSim, do not have a positive reaction when this word is mentioned. And well, it's just that if you have the opportunity or the possibility or the resources to create virtual environments without investing anything other than perhaps your time, then that's that's really an ideal place to be if you are very creative and use the environment mainly as a medium for expression. So I think that actually works quite well. But there is also the other side where you want to create an activity, that's self-sustainable. If you're investing your time, it's very likely that this time is you need to be there to be able to invest the time. So of course you've got expenses that you need to cover just to sustain yourself. Okay, I'm just talking about food and shelter, basic things. I don't need to go into that. So I'll try to explain or to maybe discuss or initiate a conversation as plainly as possible, as plainly as I can, and share some of my experiences. Bear in mind that everything that I'm doing is purely experimental, just trying to find out how best to get in touch with like-minded individuals. Like-minded doesn't mean that you have the same point of view. You have the same overall objective. Okay, it's not necessary that you have the same ideas on how you want to get things done, but you have the same or common or objectives that share a lot of common aspects. And I think most of us who are developing virtual environments are coming from a number of perspectives, a very broad range of perspectives, each complementing each other in various ways. And I'll just describe, my narrow perspective. Narrow, not because I choose it to be narrow. It's just that as an individual, there's your breadth, the scope of your perspective has to be narrow, because it's a personal one, and realistically speaking, one person cannot look at a problem from all possible angles. You can try to play the role of somebody else and get another angle, but what comes typically, you're informed by a very narrow one, which is defined by how you think about the world, etc. So I think the questions that we need to ask ourselves before we embark in, not before necessarily, you can keep asking this question throughout your effort, trying to create something that is useful or that people will like and that will generate a lot of feedback, that will provide a lot of emotional satisfaction, or that will allow you to sustain yourself while doing it. Most people want to do something and keep having payback, either emotionally or financially, but there is what I want to say is payback is not necessarily financial. So the first thing that as I said, it's not necessarily the first thing, because that's a question that keeps getting asked throughout the adventure, if we can call that, is you have to keep asking whether the need that we are perceiving out there and what we are trying to offer to satisfy that need, whether these are a good match. Okay. So most of the time, we think we have an idea of what people need, and it's not easy to distinguish whether that need is an actual one or whether we're actually projecting aspects of ourselves and trying to imagine that what we think is a need should be something that most other people would feel they need too. And that's all right. I mean, in many cases, this kind of personal to public projection works. There are many designers who design for themselves first, and if they are happy with the result, then they assume that it is likely that others will also like what's been produced. That's a feeling that I had, or I still have to some extent, but it's not necessarily true. You start learning about this, when you become a little bit more mature about listening to people, and if you listen carefully, you might actually find that your worldview is not as common as you think or you wish it would be, or things that you think is needed is not necessarily what other people need. So these are, basic philosophical issues that we are trying to touch, but they are questions that we keep asking ourselves as entrepreneurs or people trying hard to find a problem and trying to develop a solution to address this problem. Okay, so we will never know, at least I think, one way of measuring need is actually going out there and having some kind of questionnaire-based research and try to find out what the requirements are. Some people like to do it, I'm not a big fan of that approach personally. I don't have like a to-do list or a script that would help. what I find myself doing most of the time is diving in and trying to find ways to help myself achieve or perform or do things that in an easier or more facilitated way. And as I said earlier, I am more inclined to try to solve problems that I personally experience and hope that other people have the same kind of problems, and they would find the solutions as relevant to them as it is for me. There are many many problems with this approach, but this is the one that I am more in sync with. So I was drawing this this morning. I was drawing this matrix, and I was trying to find out, to focus on the problem of self-sustainability, which is what I mean by that is that if you're investing your time, let's say, in an OpenSim project, and you want to see how long you can actually keep on doing that, and you want to see how self-sustainable your effort is going to be. Okay. So if you're getting back from a project effort, either emotionally or financially or both, then it's more likely that you're going to continue investing your time in that effort. And there are cases where people get so much out of the effort emotionally that they're not concerned with the financial investments because they have other sources of income. Okay, so that's a different issue altogether. So which brings me to the point of actually looking at developing OpenSim project from a purely business perspective. Okay, that's why I think that when we hear the word business, we shouldn't be too negative about it. Okay. So to come back to the matrix, I was thinking that it may be helpful if you when you're trying to address a problem, to look at the number of people that actually might be experiencing that particular problem. And then you also need to look at the investment needed to solve that particular problem. So it's a quite simple matrix, really. So you have a case where you have a low number of people that is interested in your problem, and you can have a different case where you have a large number of people interested in a problem. Okay, so that's one factor: the size of the number of people interested in a given problem X. And the other factor is the investment needed. So you can have you can need a smaller amount of money to solve problem X, or you can actually need a large amount of money to solve problem X. And people who've worked in various technology industries, technology areas, for example, will have, their whole range of experiences to share in this domain. For example, if you worked in the assistive technology field, you will see that typically you deal with a smaller set of potential customers because for the fact of the assistive technology industry is as follows. One is that let's take, for example, the case for disabilities, whether it's physical or cognitive. Disabilities tend to be very specific to a particular individual. So any technology that you are going to develop will have to be customized to fit the needs of a particular individual. So when you develop a technology, it's more challenging to develop one piece of technology that's going to address the needs of a very large number of people. Let's take the example of screen reader applications. Okay, when we talk about people with visual impairment, the spectrum of visual impairment is very wide. You can have different types of visual impairments. So when you come out with a product, you have to see how your product can actually be highly tailorable, customizable. So in that case, you can actually produce a product that has a wider market reach. Or, you have products that's designed for specific segments of very narrow segments. And those come with difficulties, at the technical level, at the usability level, at each and every layer you can think of. Okay, if you have a generic application that's going to cater for the needs of a very wide range of potential customers, then you will have, just an example, at the interface layer, it's likely that you'll have a lot of control points that will require people to customize the application so that it fits their particular need. Okay? So there are so many factors to consider, and when you have many control points on an interface, we know how easily that can drive up the workload that people experience to get anything done with that application. So I would place, assistive technology applications in the first quadrant, the top left quadrant, where you have a very small number of people who face problem X, and let me correct myself. It's not always the case that you need a low investment. In fact, if you're talking about assistive technology, it could be high investment as well. If you're talking about developing exoskeletons, powered exoskeletons for people with mobility disorders, for example. Okay. So you can have, so that's what we call like a small niche market, where a small number of people with problem X, and you have now two cases. In one case, you might need to invest a lot of money in order to satisfy the needs of a very narrow subset of your potential, a very narrow subset of people having to deal with this particular problem. Okay. And then you have, on the other hand, you have, a large number of people with a certain problem. And you have, again, two different cases. In one case, you can invest, very little, and those needs get satisfied. So the self-sustainability potential in the green quadrant is very high. Okay, it's like most successful app technologies that does not require a lot of investment upfront, but certainly a lot of people, a very large number of people, find it very useful, and you find that self-sustainability potential is very high, even if you sell that application for free. And that's what happened. If you have that application that everybody is going to download and want to run it, and that application solves their problem, then you can actually, it's very, you're more likely to find a way to nickel dime and monetize, directly or indirectly through advertising or not. There are more opportunities there to create something that's self-sustainable. And the investment can be low now because there are many third-party infrastructure that you can use to host your applications, and the amount of investment that's needed upfront is very low. I won't talk about cloud platforms and how now it's much easier to deploy applications, to scale applications. So there are a whole range of applications that would actually fall in the green category. The big challenge here is to actually identify a problem that a very large number of people face. And sometimes that problem did not exist until you invented that application. Okay. And there are plenty of examples here. For example, instant messaging. I have to admit, I never thought instant messaging would be as big as it is now. For some reason, I always thought that pages was something that only doctors and the police or people in those domains would be interested in, and turns out no, we have Twitter and instant messaging is big, and it's something that's really great. I used to think in terms of text as being an inferior means of casual communication than voice communication. Turns out that we've seen that those are two different media, and they have perfectly valid reasons to coexist. So just to summarize, well, not to summarize, but the point I was trying to make with low investment and a high number of people that will access the application that you create with that low investment, when that number of people is high, then that creates the best conditions for self-sustainability. Okay. So self-sustainability is of a spectrum. You can have situations that's very low, where the odds of what you are creating is going to be self-sustainable is very low, and situations where what you want to create and the project or the effort is has huge potential to be self-sustainable. Okay. So at one end, you have very low self-sustainability potential, where investment is high and the niche market is low. And at the other end of the spectrum, you have self-sustainability being very high when investment is low and the size of your market is very high. Does this mean that all projects that are in the very low category will never see the light of the day? I don't think so. A lot of companies actually have made it a lot of progress by relying on alternative sources of funding that are not, particular, like market based. You have federal grants, for example, and if you look at companies, especially in the energy sector, who get massive taxpayer funding, and there are many technology sectors that actually gets funded through tax dollars. So that would be what I see as many efforts that is not market friendly, if I can use that term, either because they are too new and they are still in the research phase, and the need is not established yet. It's just very early nascent phases. So now I'm just sharing that because I'm thinking aloud, because I think that perhaps to start a discussion and see how you think about making your efforts self-sustainable, what you do and what you don't need to do. Maybe we could start a conversation and share our ideas. I feel that a lot of designers in OpenSim would probably face similar questions, so that was my primary purpose here. Okay. So thanks for your attention.